Hi everyone, it's Kimber, the Study About Specialist. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about the changes that you need to know if you're interested in studying in the United States as an international student for the ISFA Forum for 2026 and beyond. So welcome to the channel, everyone. If you are new here, again, my name is Kimber. I'm here to make your study abroad journey easier. And if you're returning, welcome back. So excited to dive into this video. So I just want to say thank you so much to everyone out there who has been on the channel for a while, in particular for this topic for ISFA, as I'm going to dive into. The ISFA video that I made back in 2023 is actually my most watched video on this channel. And I will just say that it wasn't the best video I ever put out, but I'm so glad that you were able to get the information, and it means that the information was quality, and it's something that people reach out to me about all the time. And I'm excited now to talk about, do more of an updated video on that, because I know that it's something that a lot of students who watch my channel who are interested in coming to the US want to know about. And so for the ISFA form, so for the International Student Financial Aid Application, try saying that 3 times in a row, the ISFA form, for the most part, since that video was put out, I'm going to actually link it above. Since it was put out, the overall visuals are still the same. So you're still fine to watch that video and go through it. And then I also have a walkthrough video. That's going to be the same, but there are going to be some changes that you need to think about. And a lot has changed in the past 3 years in particular, but there's been some changes more recently as well with the newer administration coming in. And these changes are likely going to be in place for the rest of the decade. So just wanting to look through those. So these include earlier deadlines now, needing to show more proof of financial commitment, and also to being able to look at the way that your home currency works. So I want to dive into each of those individually so that you can get what you need as you move forward with this particular form. So the first change that I want to dive into is the stricter documentation requirement. And this is really focusing on taxes specifically, but also looking at the other documentation that you submit. So for this particular form, and just to kind of cover it, if you have not watched the other video, or if you landed on this video, you're like, I still don't know what ISFA is. So ISFA is for international students who want to come and study here in the US. Now, this particular funding is not directly from the federal government. However, most colleges and universities and other schools deal directly with the federal government. And so they do have some oversight into what the schools do with certain forms and certain processes that they issue. And so that's why you're seeing this sort of overall change now. And it's meant to make it so that it comes into more of a alignment so that everybody's doing the same thing. In the past, what has happened is that since every school is issuing its own funding, every school does a little bit something different. Their forms often look a little bit different, but there need to be some type of uniformity, particularly to prevent things like fraud, and also to make sure that schools are not wasting money and not giving people money when they don't really need it. Now, one of the interesting parts here is for the stricter documentation, they really want you to be able to show verified tax forms. And one of the things that I have found, and I know that is very true, just living overseas for a long period of time, is that I don't think a lot of, at least in the past, a lot of Americans understand that most countries don't do taxes the way that we do here. So yes, like they have forms, they have different documents that they need, but it's not a big deal where people are spending thousands of dollars doing their taxes. There's a whole day dedicated to it. There's discounts at stores afterwards. Congratulations on doing your taxes. That's just not how the rest of the world works. And so one of the things that they were finding is that people were submitting all types of things. And it's like they're submitting whatever they have, but it doesn't really align with what the school would be looking for. When they go to look for taxes, they're looking for certain things, and they're looking at from the American perspective of what we have on our tax forms and what it's supposed to look like. And so what it's meant to do with this particular documentation restriction is to make sure that, number one, that you are being honest, so that you are submitting verified tax forms. Now, what is a verified tax form? This is essentially a form from your home government that verifies whatever type of tax you have paid. Usually you're going to be able to get that from the home office or whatever governing body that you have. It should be, a lot of times it's not going to be super long, but it'll verify whatever taxes you've paid based on however your country works. So they really want those particular forms. They also, too, have gotten stricter about other types of forms. So, for example, with birth certificates, this is something, again, that is very common in America. For us, we are not really allowed in most situations to provide any types of copies of things. And in other parts of the world, it's not as big of a deal. But here, Usually for most documentation, you have to have the actual seal on documents. So whatever governing body, for example, and here in our country, we have different states. And so every state has a different type of birth certificate. It usually has a seal on it, and it has to be the original document. It's the same thing now when you're submitting any type of documentation for ISFA. They want the original document. So this has changed compared to a few years ago when it was kind of just submit whatever you have and then we'll go with it. So you want to make sure that you're getting all that information verified. The easiest way to do it is going to be to contact the main governing body of your country. So for a lot of you, you may live in provinces, you may also live in different states, depending on what country you're in. But whatever that particular governing body is going to be, they have all that documentation because you were born in the country, and they have all the information on you. And they also too may be able to point you in the direction of getting the taxes if you don't know where to get that. But it has to be the original documentation that is like stamp of approved from the government. Another thing that you can do as well is to get it notarized. Notary republics are very common in most countries. I use them all the time overseas. And these are just people that work in post offices, work in independent capacities as well, to go through and verify that the information that they are seeing based on what they're contrasting it on and based on how they're able to verify that is a real document. So that's only going to help you. And you'll also see now that a lot of ISFA applications will ask you to submit notary verified documentation. So it has to be verified. It's no more kind of where you're just kind of uploading whatever you want. And a lot of that really is, again, just to prevent fraud. And also to, it's good housekeeping to make sure that you're having sort of a more concise way of collecting documentation, because again, with international students, people are coming from all different types of countries. You know, the documentation may look a little bit different, but if you are requiring that everybody submit something similar, then it gives you a baseline to go over. So I just want to point out the first thing is going to be the stricter documentation that has changed since 2023. So the next change is going to be based on currency and exchange rates. And I like to talk about this all the time. If you had not checked out my free download, it's a free budget guide that will be really helpful for you as you're trying to plan for your study abroad journey. It's linked below. But with this is really important. And this is something that I talk to students about all the time, but especially when you're applying for financial aid. What they're looking for now with the ISFA form is that you need to essentially estimate not only for what you're asking for, but it needs to be for the entire time. And based on the way that exchange rates work, they change literally every single day, sometimes every single hour. And so what you need to do is that you need to be able to forecast ahead. And that can be really hard because you're like, well, I don't really understand how to do that. If I'm asking for this entire year, how much money I need, how do I do that? The golden rule is that you want to account for at least 10 to 20% more. And yes, that is a lot extra, but what schools will do is they will often allot that to you, and then they can often, if you don't need that amount based on whatever your degree is, they can take that money back. Like they'll just say like the award is this much, and they kind of understand like how much you might need. And then if it ends up where you don't need it, they're able to absolve for that and make sure that that balances back out. But one of the problems in the past and why they've made this change is because a lot of students, they're looking at, let's say, they're looking at the exchange rate on February 1st, and they're literally going by that exact exchange rate on that day when they're filling out the form. And then the exchange rate between the two countries shifts so dramatically, and now the dollar is way more worth more than your currency. And so it's a discrepancy. And so it's going to be really important to sort of forecast that out. Now, there are platforms like Oando, which I love. It's the OG that I used ever since I was overseas. There are other ones as well. But it's going to be really important for you to be able to do that. One of the other things, too, that you can do that is really helpful, and most banks around the world will help you with this, is that if you go in and you're able to sit with a financial officer, they can actually help you to sort of map that out. Because, again, they often have a lot more insights to the financial market, what's kind of going on, to really look and see where's your currency going to be in the next 6 months, 7 months, next year. And it would be really helpful for you to be able to do that. Let them know what you're doing, and then just say like, hey, can you help me sort of estimate out how much should I ask for? And they won't be able to give you a specific amount because they don't want to be able to commit to that. But what they can do is to help you give you ideas of this is how much, this is what the currency is looking like. These are the likely things that might happen. I mean, for example, you'll see here in the US, people will often be able to predict, or at least they start predicting or wanting to predict when recessions are going to happen or other economic downturns. That's usually like 9 months, a year in advance. It's not something overnight. And so wherever you're coming from in your country, people who are specialized in finance particularly will know about these things, and they can help you sort of figure out, well, how much should I ask for that is above what the actual amount is. You never, in any situation, and this is just a golden rule for life, you never just want to kind of be right at the where you need to be. So if something says it costs $20,000, you never want to just kind of guess, oh, I need to request 20,000. It's much better to request 30,000. And then if you don't need that, and if it's a situation where the school is allotting you aid, they can be able to go back and sort of figure out how to take the rest off of your bill. So just figure that out. And then when you're filling that in on the ISFA form, just make sure that you're estimating above what you need. The main reason for that now is because they're not willing as much anymore to go back and change it for you. That was one of the things that a lot of schools were doing, where people had filled it out, like I said, on February 1st. And then by the time they got their aid and they got the letter, something had changed, and then schools were willing to do that. There are a lot more stricter rules now around not going in and changing that. And so whatever you have is what you have, and then you're going to need to come up with the rest yourself. So just keep that in mind as you're going through and filling out the form, that making sure that the exchange rate and all that information is correct and that you've overestimated for what you need. And then the third change is going to be centered around deadline. So in the past, a lot of ISFA forms were processed in the end of the summer. So basically how it works in the US is that people who are Americans and also international, they find out that they got into school. It's usually, I mean, sometimes you get early decision, but for most people, it's going to be March, April. And then after you go through accepting and doing all the things, people figure out if they're going to move forward. And then after that, you move into the financial aid process. And for ISFA particularly, it usually came sometime in May or in June or July. Now that has been moved up a bit. So now you're a little bit more aligned with what happens with American students, where it happens as soon as you've been accepted and you are trying to make sure that you have all your documentation in, and that the school can figure out whatever aid they're going to give you when they issue your acceptance letter. And so it's going to be important that you start your ISFA form early. And one of the things is that one of the reasons why I say that is because it's going to probably take you longer than you think. It is just a standard form, but there are a lot of key elements in there that you probably will need to go over several times, making sure that you have the right documentation and that you gather all what you need. And there's a piece where you have to write out certain things. And so you want to spend some time on it. You don't just want to rush through it. Now, most schools will also indicate when it's due, but you'll see that those dates are going to be earlier than what you would have found in the past. So for a school, for example, that maybe the ISFA form used to be due on June the 30th each year, now it's due on April the 30th each year. So the deadlines have definitely shifted, and it's definitely more of a move to have the process of it done earlier. So just keep that in mind as well, that it's going to be important to get that out there so that as you're going through and they're going through acceptance, they can figure out the aid, and then they can move you further along in the process. And so I just wanted to, before I close out, to give you some tips that I've kind of already given, but just to kind of highlight certain things that I think are going to be important. And I definitely want you to go back and watch the original ISFA video, and then also to the walkthrough, and just incorporate in, again, making the difference between what's on there now and then what is on the newer forms. I'm actually probably going to do an updated video anyway as an example, but you definitely want to get started early. That's going to be really important. For your documentations, remember that everything has to be an original. So it has to be an original. It has to have whatever seal they're asking for if they ask for that. It has to be notarized if they're asking for that. It has to be original, issued from a government or official body. With that being said as well, make backups of everything. Even though you're sending the original and you're sending it to a school and it's going to be okay, things happen, and most of you are going to be sending it either through the mail or online. Particularly for more sensitive items, you likely want to mail it in. Like, I personally would not trust putting my birth certificate on the internet, but that's just me. But what you want to do is, even if you're sending in a packet in the mail, have backups just in case something happens, because again, you can get a birth certificate again, but it's a little bit more of a hassle. And at least if you have a backup, then you're kind of all set and you can use that until you can get what you need. And that's for everything. Make a backup of everything. Make a backup of any type of bank statements, tax statements. You want to make a lot of copies. This is something that I just preach about everything when you're studying abroad and when you're planning to study abroad too. It just makes sense to go ahead and do that. The other thing as well is that you want to read, reread, and reread again on all the documentation. One of the very first things that I say in the ISFA walkthrough is that, and this is still very true, that every ISFA form is different. And so, and as you're kind of going through, you'll see that if you're applying to multiple schools, but every form is going to be different. So there are some schools that they ask you to write in all capital letters. There are some that they're asking you to write in black ink only. There are some that are asking you to write in certain sections where it's half capital, half lowercase. It's really all really weird, but this is the reality. All of us, especially here in America, have to deal with that. The way these forms are set up, they're asking for different things and there's no rhyme or reason why. It's just the way that they end up processing it. But you want to be clear on that, because if you're not following directions, you could potentially have your application locked out because you haven't done what they've asked you for. So just being very aware of that. And that's going to be really important as you go through this process now with all these changes, and make sure that you're very, very clear that even if you read through the application once and you feel like you got it, to read through it again and even have someone else just look at it to make sure that it's online with what they're asking for. Have you heard about any of these changes? Have you already experienced any of these changes? I would love for you to leave a comment below. As I said before, definitely check out the videos that I've made in the past about it, including the most popular one. Definitely download the free budgeting e-guide, and I will see you in the next video.